Here at Spoonful of Strength, we want to make this podcast interactive. We want to hear your stories, and we want you involved in our conversations. Follow Spoonful of Strength on Instagram, where we will post questions throughout the week. Your answers may be shared on our podcast. Do you have a story to share? Send us a message on Spoonful of Strength on Instagram with your health journey, and we may interview you on this show. Welcome to Spoonful of Strength, a podcast for people with chronic illness and the ones who love them, where we talk all things chronic. Here's your host, Rachel and Tina. Welcome to Spoonful of Strength. I'm glad you're here today. Unfortunately, this is going to be a solo event for me. Tina is not going to be with us today. She's had a death in her, I'm going to say family, one of her closest friends. So she is taking this week to remember her dear friend, Russ, and all of us just wrap our arms around her and send lots of love to Tina this week. This is our first double episode of the week, where now on Thursdays we will be extending an invitation to you to share your story. It gives us a chance to learn a little bit about different diseases, and we're really excited. We've got a long list of people that will be coming on, and just amazing people. And today is just another amazing individual that we're going to learn about. We've got Christina Lisk on today. Now, she has battled chronic illness from the time that she was a young girl and throughout her life, and is going to talk with us a little bit about the Nutcracker Syndrome that she was diagnosed with, and also some other illnesses that are potentially in the future that she's going through testing for. I'm really excited to have her on the show today, so let's go ahead and bring her in. Hello, Christina. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderfully. How about you?
I am excited to be here. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your health journey. So let's start out here by asking a little bit about yourself. Tell me where you grew up.
I came from the greater Philadelphia area. I was raised in media. I went to school on the main line, the whole fancy private school circuit, the works. It was an interesting experience being in the private school world as someone with a chronic illness. At the time I started going, we were only 6 years into the ADA. They had never dealt with chronically ill and disabled kids before. A lot of new ground was broken with my head within the private school system.
So what was your first experience with chronic illness?
My first experience was the beginning of chronic ear infections when I was 6 months old. People may say, oh, well, that happens to all kids. Most kids outgrow them. Mine put me into 10 surgeries, 3 sets of ear tubes, 1 adenoidectomy/plastiotomaectomy, 1 tympanoplasty on the left ear, 4 tympanoplasties on the right ear, and then tonsils gone rotten because of all the infections. By the time I was 18, I already had 10 surgeries.
Oh my. Did you experience this after you turned 18?
This has gone on in every capacity possible ever since. Like, I got ear infections all the time when I was in college. I don't go partying or to nightclubs or anything like that, because if I get a cold, my ears blow up. I'm sick for at least 2 weeks. And this is on top of the other stuff that I deal with too. I have multiple forms of migraine, anaphylactic food allergies, an inflammatory skin disease called hidradenitis suppurativa, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and vertigo that they think they finally have figured out another for it, but I'm in testing for that right now. And this is on top of OCD, PTSD, and clinical depression. It's been a hell of a ride, but I've gotten a lot of good writing done along the way.
Yeah. When did you start writing?
Well, that depends on how one thinks of writing, because I always told stories when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I would play dolls and then write all my doll stories down. Before I could write, I dictate stories to my mother. My writing really got serious, though, after I had my first tympanoplasty on my right ear. Because I was in this limbo where my brain was really active, but if I left the house for more than an hour, I'd sleep for another 3. So I just sat in front of the computer and wrote and wrote and wrote. Next thing I know, I got 200 pages. I gave them to my English teacher. She took one look at me and said, Christina, if you stop writing for any reason, I will hunt you down and make you start again. When I was 18, I got my first publication with a radio station by doing their PR Halloween guides. I've written for Title Magazine, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, American Fencing, HearingLikeMe.com, The Mighty. I also have a short story published in Nothing Ever Happens in Fox Hollow Horror Anthology, Volume 2, a poem and last stanza poetry journal. And I presented my current novel in progress, Way Back into Love, at Middlebury Breadloaf in Sicily in 2019.
What sorts of things do you write about?
I honestly have centered a lot about chronic illness in my writing, just because it's the thing I've experienced the most.
Yeah.
Everything I do is influenced by it. Like the way I pick my clothes out in the morning, or the way I move through different things throughout the day. And the lens of chronic illness, people greatly underappreciate how much it shapes your journey for the better.
Yeah.
Like it gives a better sense of morality. It causes you to place importance on things that otherwise get taken for granted. People, if you put the lens on chronic illness on everything you do, it's automatic misery. No, that is not true at all. The chronic illness lens can be educational, beautiful, anything you make of it. If you automatically assume chronic illness is misery, that's a you problem.
Yeah, it's all about mindset. So one of the things that why we brought you on here is because you have a disease that I have never heard of, and that is Nutcracker Syndrome. And so can you tell us a little bit about, how that all came to be, describe, your first symptoms and going through that process?
I didn't even know my first symptoms were symptoms of Nutcracker syndrome at first. Yeah. I thought it was all problems with PCOS and suspected endometriosis. All my symptoms in the beginning were mainly gynecological, and I had them as far back as 2014. I would get these really bad cramps from out of the blue, where while I was cramping, it felt like everything was going to drop out of me. And even right after my graduation from college, I was right off to the doctor's office getting ultrasounds. They were trying to figure out why I had been bleeding for 6 weeks, why I was in so much pain. There was no established pattern. The one thing they found a year later was a single varicose vein on my left ovary. My gynecologist said, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But my GP was like, no, this needs to be taken seriously. Due to other health issues arising, though, it got overlooked for several years, especially because when pushing the endo diagnosis, people were like, well, you can only do that if you get exploratory surgery. I already had 10. They were really traumatic. I couldn't go back into surgery on maybe alone.
Right.
But the one varicose vein grew into multiple until it became full-on pelvic congestion, wherein my ovaries and my uterus were covered in varicose veins. It got that severe in 2020, but everyone thought I was just faking or looking to get out of work. So I got into the habit of living on caffeine and a leave and just muscling through the pain at every given chance. I got to the point of thinking, no one cares about you. No one cares about your pain. People only care about what they can get out of you. So just shut up and keep smiling and do what you have to do to stay alive. But by this time last year, I was in so much pain, I couldn't work. I couldn't get out of bed without 2 shots of espresso. And I ended up staying with my best friend. And while I was with her, she took one look at me and said, you need to get some help. You're in a lot of trouble. And another friend of mine had been begging me to have interventive surgery for years. And I was like, I'm not doing surgery on maybe. But this friend was like, you are in too much pain. Why can't you see that?
Yeah.
And eventually I finally said, you know what? I need to start taking this seriously. The gynecologist looked at my pelvic congestion and said, this is likely endometriosis, but it could have other causes. I said to her, what other causes? And she said, it could be vascular problems too. Originally, she wanted to do the surgery and then send me to vascular, but I thought, you know what? Vascular can be ruled out non-surgically. I'm not signing any surgical papers until everything else has been ruled out. Mm-hmm. Vascular surgeon didn't take it seriously at first. He thought that, again, it was endometriosis. Why was I coming to him for a gynecological problem? But he changed his mind when I said to him, I have PTSD from growing up in childhood surgery. This is a really traumatic thing for me. I don't want to do the wrong surgery by mistake. Just please, can we rule this out before I have surgery? I mean, we were both on the same page that it was probably endo, but we need to check everything. We were both surprised when I came back as having Nutcracker Syndrome, which is when the left renal vein gets pinched between two other arteries. That pinching will cause an overflow of blood either to go into the kidney itself or go into the gonadal vein and create varicose veins all around whatever parts you have. In my case, a uterus and ovaries. We were flabbergasted that all of those mainly gynecological symptoms were truly from a vascular cause. And when they did exploratory surgery to study the compression, they found my left renal vein was compressed at 80%.
Oh my.
I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I had gone another year or two without treatment.
Right, right. And especially dealing with these doctors that weren't taking it seriously and blaming it on other things. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, me included, that you get one diagnosis and then it's 10 times harder to get a second diagnosis because they blame the first one and it doesn't, everything gets blamed on everything else. That can be so frustrating. What was the one thing that you did to advocate for yourself in those situations where the doctors are not taking you seriously?
I'm not going to lie, a little bit of profanity helps.
I'm sure it did.
A little bit of shock value helps wake them up a bit, but I found the doctors to be a lot more understanding when I say to them, like, please do not put me into surgery if you can help it. Please do anything else to rule out. When doctors hear you being more conservative, then they seem to be more likely to listen. I was very clear with all my doctors, like, I'm very medication sensitive. If I need any sort of medication, I don't want it to be pushed heavily right away. And with the surgery, they were relieved to hear that I wasn't just pushing them to do one particular thing. I was like, please, can we figure out how to make a plan to give me good quality of life?
Having a chronic illness, my mood swings by the day, sometimes by the hour. Do you ever wish you could have a candle for every emotion you go through? Well, now you do. Introducing our emotion candles. Feeling anxious? Light our anxiety candle. Feeling tired? Light our pooped out candle. Feeling frisky? Stressed out? Sad? We've got you covered. See all of our designs at Spoonful of Strength on Etsy. That's Spoonful with 2 L's. Use code podcast for 20% off. What was your quality of life in those years that you were dealing with that?
Down, 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 down. Even when I was in college and having all of that pain, I had a couple of visits to the ER my senior year of college. Right before I graduated, that was when I was bloating and bleeding and having more pain. And every year, the symptoms just kept getting worse. I ended up ignoring it via multiple rounds of anaphylaxis in 2016 and 2017, thinking it's just pelvic pain. What does everything with that matter when I can't breathe?
So you get the diagnosis. When you talk about surgery, was that pretty much the only option that you were given, or were there options of medicine or anything else?
Surgery was the only option. By the time I was given that as my option, we hit the end of the line. If there's another option before surgery, I will take it and cling to it for dear life. I have to be dragged into an OR kicking and screaming.
Mm-hmm.
Not literally.
Yeah.
Said it beforehand, but figuratively, I will beg a doctor for anything but surgery. And the most horrifying surprise with the Nutcracker Syndrome was that I needed two, not one, two. The first one was the exploratory one to map out the nature of the compression. The second one was an ovarian vein transposition, where they'd take my left ovarian vein, snip it from the left ovary, and move it to one of the biggest blood vessels in the body, the inferior vena cava. The idea was that the heavy blood flow going through the ovarian vein from the compression, it's being put into place that it can actually be handled, not flooding the uterus and ovaries and causing severe pain.
How quickly were they able to diagnose it, do the first and then the second surgery? What time span?
The diagnosis came on September 20th, 2023. The first surgery was on October 25th. The second surgery, the big one, as we called it, was November 30th, 2023.
What was your recovery like? Did you have instant relief from the pain that you had experienced before the surgery?
Oh, absolutely. I felt that pain relief right away. All of my friends were saying, Christina, you are going to feel so much better upon waking up from this surgery. If I stayed perfectly still afterwards, I felt no pain at all. But if I moved, the incision was the thing that hurt like hell. This is an open abdominal procedure.
Oh.
And one at that. Only watch the video of it on YouTube if you have a strong stomach. For any listeners with potential triggers on here, I'm not going to go into graphic details. You do not need to be triggered like that today.
Yeah, exactly. But it was definitely a major abdominal surgery. So with the Nutcracker syndrome, is that something that once you did the surgery, it's done and over with, or are there lingering symptoms or any follow-up, things like that?
I had to go into physical therapy after it was done. All the muscles in the area containing the varicose veins, they had gotten really dysfunctional because of all the pain. There was constant overcompensation to keep things from being worse. So the doctor was like, yeah, let's get you physical therapy for this so that the muscle spasms stop and you can start functioning as though you don't have this pain now.
Looking forward, are we done with Nutcracker, or is it something that can come back?
It's not so much that it can come back. It's more that we have to watch whether or not the ovarian vein transposition holds. Mine ended up partially occluded in a tissue collapse, which it's not supposed to do. Typically, it's supposed to stay open. Unfortunately, though, tissue collapse is not something new to me. Part of why I had 4 tympanoplasties was that the grafts would be put in to rebuild the eardrum, but they just keep collapsing, blowing out, or tearing. And in both my vascular surgeon's office and the ENT's office, I was told, we've never seen anything like this happen in our patients before. And I mean, with the ENT's office, I figured, okay, my ear's just really weird. This is just a fluke. But by the time you're being told that in another specialty, when you're an adult instead of a teenager, into very different procedures, then you gotta ask yourself, what's fundamentally going on here? This is not a series of coincidences. There's a pattern holding all of this together. I need to know what this pattern is so we don't have these repeat complications or partial failures. There comes a point where it's like, if you see a pattern and you ignore what's going on, then you have to question where your responsibility lies in it.
Right. So where do you go from here? You've got this pattern. So are you looking into other diseases? I know you talked about some things that are still getting figured out, but seeing that pattern, where did you go from there?
Well, one of the most common things coming with Nutcracker syndrome is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic disorder where the connective tissue is not formed the way it should be. It's often more loose and stretchy than the average person's connective tissue. There are 13 different subtypes of it. I don't know which one I may or may not have. I have to get genetic testing. They have it for 12 out of 13. They don't have it for hypermobile. But it's the type of thing where I thought it could never be me. Mm-hmm. Whenever I heard people talking about EDS, I thought they were talking about like the most extreme scenarios. You have to be in the ER every week for tachycardia. You have to be able to roll over in your bed and automatically sublux something. You have to be in a wheelchair at least part of the time. And I was like, well, that's not me. I'll be a great ally for people in the chronic illness community living with EDS, but that's not me. It could never be me. Yeah. But then you find out that you have a rare diagnosis that's far more common in the EDS population. Anything that can go wrong with things like skin, eardrums, anything involving connective tissue, it goes wrong. And the hardest part about that, it's not even whether or not you have a particular sickness. Because with something like this, you either have it or you don't. It's not like you suddenly wake up one day and you have it. It's more like your whole perception of it changes. You're forced to question everything you know, everything you believed about yourself and other people, how much internalized ableism you hold, and how you see yourself going forward. Like, what about you changes when you know this versus what about you stays the same regardless of diagnosis?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. I think with anybody, when you get a diagnosis, your whole mindset changes. I have MS, and I thought, okay, this is just going to be something that's just going to be, fatigue and all of this. And I went to my first MS walk, and I saw a spectrum of people that looked healthy and people that were in wheelchairs, and it opened my eyes, and I was like, okay, this is bigger than what I thought. And my mind couldn't wrap around what it was and how it was going to look and all of that. And it's hard to wrap your head around all the things that, you could see potentially in your future. And I'm sure, with EDS and things like that, what's the outlook as far as, if you get that diagnosis? I'm not 100% familiar. I know we're going to be interviewing someone with EDS to learn a little bit more, but what is the outlook as far as the EDS is concerned?
I mean, again, it'll vary from subtype to subtype. Mm-hmm. One of the that they're more worried about with me is vascular EDS, and to me, that's the stuff of nightmare. That's the subtype where I'm like, for the love of God, please let me have anything but that, because you're at risk for things like aortic dissection or major organ rupture because of the connective tissue being so thin in those specific areas. Mm-hmm. Like, just if I have to have it, please, just not that form, anything but that.
Right.
That one thing aside, though, like the vascular one aside, though, the main reasons to know about it are to make sure that in any surgery going forward, we know how to better combat complications, potential reactions to medication, account for where looser connective tissue may cause something to go wrong. Mainly, it's all about protecting myself during surgery and making sure that with that little bit of information, everyone's on the same page and we're not doing constant treatments asking, why is this not working? That's a terrible feeling for you, for the doctor, for the people who love you, for the nurses on the doctor's team. No one wins if we don't know what's going on. People think that we seek a diagnosis for social media clout or to get the likes, to get the attention, but it's not true. this is a collaborative effort between the individual and the medical setting. We need to be in a place where we're not adversaries based around social media, but a joined unit trying to get to the same end goal, well-being.
Yeah. A couple years ago, my husband wanted to give me an MS t-shirt for my birthday. All he could find, though, were brightly colored t-shirts with big graphics, like a smiley face given 2 middle fingers, and words like F U MS. Isn't there an option for a simple, stylish t-shirt that spreads awareness with kindness? That's when I created Spoonful of Strength, shirts that are inspirational, motivational, and stylish. You can find us on Etsy, Instagram, and Facebook at Spoonful of Strength. That's Spoonful with 2 L's. Enter code podcast for 20% off anything in the shop. So where are you in the diagnosis process? You've done the genetic testing then?
Not yet. Find a way to pay for it is really hard. Like with some of the genetics labs that were suggested by the Ehlers-Danlos Society, they don't take my insurance, but they won't let me do anything out of pocket either. Like they won't let me get in on the out of pocket financial support offers. It's like you either pay the full fee or nothing. And it's totally not cool. I tried getting in with the genetics lab at the hospital where I was being seen, but they're not taking anybody with EDS anymore or suspected EDS. And even if they did, one of their doctors has one of the worst reputations in the EDS community in Philadelphia. So it's been an uphill climb trying to find somewhere to get genetically tested that's actually affordable. I don't know at what point is it worth trying to do a GoFundMe or take out a loan just to get this over with and get this away from being over my head.
Right. How do you deal with the mental part, not just of this genetic testing, but of the whole chronic journey of dealing with the Nutcracker Syndrome and all of the, things you experienced as a child and all of that? What sort of mental toll does that play in there?
There are still days where I will just bawl about everything. There are still days where I get royally pissed. It's not like I'm sunshine and rainbows all the time. Though you can't have sunshine and rainbows without a bit of storm clouds to reflect that light. And certainly there'd be no earth for the sun to shine upon if there were not clouds bringing water to the soil. Everything has to fit together. No one's one thing all the time in their chronic illness journey.
Right, right.
Part of how my novel in progress got started was because I was at the bottom of the barrel with chronic illness again. But this time it was one of the other reasons my diagnosis got delayed. I had a go around with Lyme disease that went undiagnosed for 2 years. It's the hazard of being a cat lady. You run into a lot of animals. You're not thinking about fleas and ticks and being careful. If you get bitten by a tick, that's it. But at the time when I wasn't diagnosed with that, I was dealing with a lot of pain. I was so angry about all the medical gaslighting. And I started writing just to get all my feelings out. Originally, it was Hitalia fan fiction because I thought this isn't to publish. This isn't try to get recognition. This is just to get my feelings out. And then I put it online and people were like, hey, you really got disability, right? So I just kept going and going and going until I realized, oh God, this has become something bigger than me. I have to see this all the way through to the end. And like I said, I'm still working on it now. The structure of it went from one book to what I'm envisioning as 4. I want to get the first one finished before I get started on the other 2. I tried getting started on the second one. And while I'm 3/4 of the way through the second one, it's also the type of thing where you have to make sure your first one is sound or everything else is going to end up janky. You're not going to have a good foundation. And the messages you want to show about chronic illness, they're not going to get out there. I guess where it all comes back to is that writing and storytelling and advocacy, what is advocacy but us sharing our stories to make the world a better place. All of those forms of storytelling have things that have gotten me through. It's like, if I have to have this, I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm not going to sit and suffer in silence and misery. If people want to tell me, oh, everything happens for a reason, I will make that reason myself. You do not get to tell me my reason. I will tell you my reason. I will make my story what it is I want my story to be. You don't get that power over me.
No. Beautiful. So where can people find, you said you've had a book that's been published. I want you to go through a little bit and tell us where they can find your books, where they can find you on Instagram or Facebook, or just where they can get to you and experience your poetry.
Well, Nothing Ever Happens in Fox Hollow can be found on Amazon. The Last Stanza Poetry Journal, I'm in number 14, journal number 14, with a theme I never knew. That should be both on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble. And my Instagram handle is therunciblespoonie. It's a pun on Runcible Spoon from Edward Lear's The Owl and the Pussycat. It's one of my favorite poems of all time. There's one thing that I do want to mention in closing, though. I don't want it to sound like with my Nutcracker Syndrome surgery, like nothing's changed and I haven't gotten better just because it ended up partially occluded. I am 1,000 times better than where I was before. The pain is minimal compared to what I had before. At best, maybe it's a 3, or when I say at best, I mean like at its highest level. Like, I'm sorry, this can be really tough to categorize sometimes. At its highest level, it's a 3 to a 4 on the worst days. Before surgery, I walked around with a 4 and it would shoot up to a 6 to an 8. No warning. My vascular surgeon made a point of telling me that within the vascular surgery world, it's not about how it looks. It's about how it functions. What determines the success of a surgery is not whether or not the architecture is perfect. It's, are you in pain? Are you able to get out of bed? Can you live the life that you want to live? And with the first 2 questions, it's an absolute yes. With the third question, I'm on my way there. I'm getting there with every single passing day. So even though I'm mid-diagnostic process for something else, even though the ovarian vein transposition did not go as perfectly as intended, I'd still like to think my story has a happy ending, or at least a hopeful one.
Yes. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did, learning about the Nutcracker Syndrome and all the things that Christina has been through. And she's turned those challenges into exceptional stories. And we're going to share the links down below of all of her books and her poetry and all of that. I also have to mention that she is going to be published in a travel book called Seasons of Sisterhood, which is about the journey that she took through Cameroon in 2016. She is just a wealth of knowledge and is sharing her knowledge through her poetry and her books, and we're really excited to see what the future has for Christina. So I'm going to wrap that up. We'll see you next Tuesday. Tina will be here, and we will be talking about cognitive issues. So we look forward to talking with you next week, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.